Now they're warmed up for you. So we're going to switch to Dan's screen here, and I'm going to hand it over to him. Ladies and gentlemen, Dan Katcher.
No one can hear me. Is this thing on? Yeah. Whoa.
It's definitely on now.
Everyone can hear me now. Excellent. Welcome, and thank you all for coming. And thanks, I really appreciate the audience I've gotten and the fans of the show, and it's just been a fantastic ride doing these dragons, as well as thousands of other, not thousands, but hundreds of other projects I work on in any given year. But the dragons, of course, are my most famous thing. It's, I guess, what I'm known for more than anything, and they are really fun to make. I've been working on that show since the second season. And I originally, before I was doing Game of Thrones, excuse me, I'm going to sit down here for a sec. It's like it's hard to stand and look at the computer and switch the images. I had worked on, there's no back button on this thing. How do you like that? Sorry. I had worked for being a traditional artist. I was a sculptor, and let's pull these up. Oh. Well, that's interesting. I had worked for Game of Thrones, excuse me, not Game of Thrones, forgive me, for McFarlane Toys, making figures for them for years, working as a freelancer in New York for many years, until about 2008, I decided I'd had enough of living in New York and decided to move to California, where I worked for Gentle Giant for a bit, and didn't really care for that. As a traditional artist, I found work was sort of leaving. It was disappearing, and ZBrush had just started taking over. At the time, I hated ZBrush when I was a traditional artist. I thought it was just the worst thing in the world, the worst thing to ever happen to artwork. Hated it. And could never understand how this computer could allow me to be able to actually make my artwork. But it wasn't until version 3 came out of ZBrush and my friend Dave Igo turned me on to it that suddenly it clicked and my digital world began. And with that came Terra Nova as my first sort of project. I got that at Pixamondo. I had been doing, like I said, statuaries of dragons and such before, so I was very lucky then to have found myself just working at Pixamondo, making these dinosaurs. Neville Page had started some of the designs, but then I got the chance to just take over the show based on some of the rework I had done of his pictures, of his dinosaurs. This one I made from scratch is the Ankylosaur from the show, which was totally fun. And while I was working on this show, there was a little conversation happening behind me by this guy Rayner talking about a dragon for some show Game of Thrones. And I thought, oh, Game of Thrones, I kind of heard of that. I think there's a dragon in it, right? Rayner's like, yeah, you make dragons, Dan. I said, do I? Well, I've been making dragons for McFarlane Toys and all these other companies for years and years and years and years. Yeah, let me just show you some of that stuff since it's, wait. Oh, sorry. Where's the, oh, here it is. Sorry, my bad. I know a lot of this is on my website, and I really don't want to show you guys stuff that you've already seen if you've looked at my work on my website, because that would just be boring. But for those of you that haven't looked, just real quick, there's some examples of my clay work, for instance. This is a flying monkey I did for Gentle Giant before getting into digital work. Here is the Hulk. See, now I don't know how to spell. Statuary of a Hulk I did in Roma Plastilina before I started doing digital. And as you can see, the Hulk here is in clay still. Never made it to a finished sculpt because the guy I gave it to told me he was going to make a mold of it, and then it disappeared. And I never got it back. So this Hulk, these images of the Hulk are the only thing that exists to this day. I was so heartbroken over this loss of the Hulk that I decided that traditional sculpting I was done with it. and I am going to learn this ZBrush, and my friend Dave, like I was saying before, gave me the program, and bam. I mean, it just finally with 3.1 took off. And now I can't even imagine going back and actually touching clay again. It feels kind of gross to me, to be honest with you. It's like it gets under my fingernails, and I'm like sitting there picking out dirt from my fingers all day. With the computer, oh, it's so clean and nice. Of course, I had to have a back surgery as a consequence from sitting all day. Listen to me, everybody. You get up and walk around. Seriously, in this industry, you don't want a back surgery. Ugh. I mean, it was kind of fun. The drugs were awesome. But I recommend against it. The catheter, I don't want to talk about that. But back to the dragons. I'm sure a lot of you are wondering kind of where these creatures come from or how they, I guess, came into being or who designed them. I designed them, just so we're clear. There's been a few people that have... I don't know, there's a couple of people in rigging and lighting and shading who think they designed these things, but they don't. Just so we understand each other. These are creatures that have lived with me my whole life. These were not things that just popped out of my head and I plopped on paper one day. These are constant study and work and focus and a love of dinosaurs and animals and creatures and a constant study of these animals and creatures. The dragons are just simply a mix of everything that I think is awesome and cool. Let me show you some examples of what I mean. So if I go into my images folder here, you know, when I'm making the dragons, the first thing I'm doing is referencing bat skeletons and bats. So before I'm even thinking about a single scale of this thing, or the eyeballs or the teeth or anything, I am thinking about the physics. First thing is physics. Form follows function. Things have got to work. That's number one. So when you're designing a creature, the one thing that I absolutely hate are vestigial limbs. I hate things that don't work. I hate creatures that move around without the facilities of which to do such things. I don't like moving skeletons, for instance. When I worked on Game of Thrones Season 1, I had done like this original concept sculpt, which is actually what they used for production model, of the dead horse, the zombie rider that was comped in and made and everything. It was sort of a quick little thing I did. But I like that because there's still enough meat and vestigial garbage gunk on there that the horse could move. But without any of that muscle, it's just pure magic. Pure magic. And I mean, I like that, but Game of Thrones isn't pure magic. It's a mix. It's kind of like magic, but magic that kind of works. It works at least enough so that you sort of believe it. And, you know, keeping within that, I really do try to think about anatomically and physiology how things work, how my dragons work. So we start, this is a fun thing I did. That is pretty much all I had to do for the ice dragon. Now, the ice dragon was simply just Drogon with a different paint job, essentially. They're all Drogon. Here's the secret. They're all Drogon. Every one of them. Just with different horns and a little bit different faces. So, yeah, I might get in trouble for that at some point. I don't know. But already just sculpting one of these guys is so much work. Moving them and having to put them in positions is a whole nother job. And that also comes with my job title. So aside from actually sculpting the creatures to HBO, to client, I have to present them with images like this that kind of show, this is from season 4, you know, here's what Drogon's now going to look like in this pose, at this scale, on this rock. And here's just an example of what a raw image coming out of ZBrush looks like before I turned it into Ice Dragon image. So in the initial stages, in the first few weeks that I'm on the job for Game of Thrones, I am literally keeping it pretty rough, doing a few of these little illustrations where I'm using Photoshop and overlaying some of the scale work or actually physically illustrating in Photoshop just a little bit to sell the concepts. And then from there, It goes on to the final rendered piece. This is actually a render Pixamondo did for the show, so you can kind of get a look at. Oh, there's the dragon from season 5. I gotta watch that wheel. From season 5, that's Viserion. A lot of fun stuff. But enough, aside from Game of Thrones, I also have been working on other fun projects as well, which I'm sure none of you care about, like The Flash and stuff like that. Kidding. I work on The Flash and Legend of Tomorrow, and what's the other one? Arrow and Supergirl. Supergirl, yes, thank you from the back there. These are all really fun shows, and we get to do a lot of great work for them, so I want to plug them just a little bit. I'm going to show you some of the images we made from there, from Encore. So one of my fun creatures was the Dominator, which is an alien race. Funny story about the Dominator. That's actually my old boss's sort of comic creation that I then got to reinterpret, Todd McFarlane that being. And so it was really fun to have the chance to, I guess, kind of work on a Todd thing again and not actually have to be paid by them or work for them directly. No offense anyway. So that was nice. Yeah, there he is. There's his ugly head. And those are fun. And then I get to make all these fun creatures. So working in TV, for me, has been a lot of fun. Game of Thrones is rare, in which I have 3 months every year to work on a piece. The rest of these are done in about 5 weeks, 4 weeks, 3 weeks, 2 weeks, depending on the deadlines. But that's, for me, funness. So I'm constantly, when I'm at work, in sort of speed sculpt mode, in a sense. I do get time to go in and refine details and stuff, but it's always a rush, and I like that. I like that in TV. That's really fun for me. I would hate to have to sit there for years constantly working on nothing but dragons, for instance. I would lose my mind. So luckily, I am fortunate that I get to spread myself around and do other fun projects as well. But back to the dragons a little bit. I think I should probably show you how I make them, right? Would you like to see? Well, okay. So this is kind of, we're getting to the end here. Sort of like where we're getting up to now. For those of you that are techie, you will notice if you look up here, there's a little number that says 87.942 million polygons. Some horrible, large, god-awful freaking number that I hate. And I hate numbers, by the way. I don't know if I made this clear to any of you, but mathematically, organizationally, technically, I'm almost, I hate to use bad words, retarded, stupid, ignorant, dumb. I don't know how to do it. Luckily, ZBrush has made it so that I don't have to, that most of these, what would be awful processes, have been somewhat automated for me. And I also work in pipelines now where otherwise processes they'd have to learn at home are made much simpler, like working with 3D Studio Max at my current job, for instance. But ZBrush is fairly simple. And honestly, my approach to the program is not technical whatsoever. It really comes from basic sculpting. So what I do is relate all of the years that I spent as a traditional artist and those tools that I created. I would have a huge chest of tools with all little wires and stuff and different pieces to do different things, cat hair brushes to make pores and wrinkles. So I had to learn to kind of take those skills and then make ZBrush do the same thing that the clay would do for me. And so I've developed my own ways of doing it. Now, the way that I start a piece, of course, when I start a dragon's head, it sure as heck doesn't look like this with this much detail, right? This is after quite a bit of work just to get that kind of crazy scaleness on the things. So before I even go there, where do I start? I start with something that looks like this. All of my pieces, whether it's the Dominators, the monkeys, doesn't matter what they are, they all start with the skeleton. I build it inside. It's like the way I sketch out kind of the physics of it. And I make sure that, for instance, the proportions of the wings are going to be big enough to sustain flight. I make sure that the legs are going to work. And I take these bones and I'll use transpose and start moving them around and make sure that I could put him in different poses. Now, I don't go too crazy with the skeleton at first. This skeleton that you're looking at now is one that I basically made from stealing some guy's OBJ of a T-Rex skeleton and then taking my own parts and sort of fixing it and making it work for Drogon. You know, obviously, T-Rexes don't have this sort of mammalian scapula, for instance, that I needed to sustain his flight. But they do have these nice, right here, these back ridges, which are really cool, and they come into play later when I actually start sculpting. So after I've spent some time making the bones, and by the way, if you don't know how to make the bones, you don't have to. Luckily for everyone in here, there is a little brush. It's now hidden in this last issue, but if you just go into your brush and your insert IMM, guess what you'll find in there? Dragon bones, man. Yeah. Dragon bones. It's like they made it the program just for me and my wants. Thank you. Thank you. I was like, dragon bones? Perfect. If only you had made me a cat skeleton. Oh wait, no, I'm not supposed. If only you'd made me other kinds of skeletons as well. Maybe someone will do that at some point and scan them because I really love them. But you did provide me with a wonderful human skeleton that I used to start just about all of my humanoid characters. And then what do I do with this skeleton? Well, like I was saying before, things have physiology, don't they? So what I want to do now, there's two different ways in which I do this. To start, oh yeah, it's double click now. To keep it simple, ZBrush has a little secret hotkey, if you want to call it that, about, you guys know about pulling things using the, let me just put, better I show you. So you've got this wonderful brush in here called the snake hook brush. Now, snake hook is one of those weird brushes that just completely destroys a mesh, usually. It pulls things out, makes a mess of everything, right? But for me, it's wonderful because it has a secret function. And let me show you its secret function and how I use it. So what I'd like to do now is I have the skeleton. Now, I want to keep the skeleton and the skull as a separate object from the body that I'm going to be building around it. And the reason will become very clear to you in just a moment. So what I'm going to do now, and forgive me if you know all these techniques, I'm sorry if I'm boring any of you, but this is just the way I make it, and this is what I'm going to show you. So I'm going to go ahead now, and I'm going to just simply append a Polymesh 3D. Blammo. I'm going to take this Polymesh 3D. I mean, it doesn't matter where it is in space. I'm also going to turn off perspective. It's nice. I like to switch work modes between working within perspective and in orthographic, going kind of back and forth. Reason being, it's not a real perspective that we get in ZBrush, and it also seems to mess up symmetry a lot if you work in perspective. So in order to keep symmetry when I need it, I keep it off. And also, especially when you're working with something huge, like a dragon, having perspective on and really looking at it in what would be real scale is insane. The dragon's head is as big as the front of a 747, for instance. It's too much. So like to keep perspective off, keeps it light, keeps the computer moving faster, and allows me to get my muscles in there pretty quick. So basically, the first thing I'd like to do is start to fill in the skeleton with the guts and stuff that I'm going to start to lay muscles on top of. So first thing, and if I'm running low on time, somebody should just let me know. But basically, I'm going to go ahead now. I'm going to turn on symmetry. And I'm simply going to get a sphere, a Z-sphere. Hey, really? There we go. And I'm just going to go to the star, and I'm going to go delete hidden, because that's the last time we'll ever look at that. So we'll go into geometry, modify topology, and we'll delete hidden, that sucker. And now I'm just going to go ahead and start. I love the new gizmo, by the way. It's really cool. but sometimes I really just like to do it old school. It's kind of fun. So basically, the two brushes I'm going to be using now for hours when I start to make something like this is, guess what brush? I should have hotkeyed things, so I didn't have to do this. But move. Just a standard old move tool. So first thing I'm going to do, let's just say I'm just going to work on a section of this dragon, just so you sort of get an idea of how my process works. So the first thing I'm going to do is to fill in that chest cavity, because I don't want holes, but I do want to have those ribs exposed. And that's very important for the process, that I always have the markers of those bones. Why? Why? There's a big difference between where bones protrude in a body and where muscle protrudes. There's a hardness to it, and it creates lines. And I always want to be able to go back and see where those bones are. I want to always know where that scapula is. I always want to know where that connection to the deltoid is when I'm sculpting. So even as a traditional artist, I would have to, if I needed that reference, I would have to go back and carve into my statue again, take it all the way back down to something if I had gone wrong, and rebuild it. And now with ZBrush, I don't have to do that, because I can keep that skeleton as a separate object for as long as I want. And at some point, what I'm going to do is actually I'm going to take the skeleton and this muscle and combine it into one Dynamesh object that I'm then going to start sculpting even more on and putting more detail on. So again, I'm thinking about these things from the inside out. I really am thinking about the physiology of it. And I'm thinking about, does this guy have enough guts? Does he have enough chest mass to support this massive wingspan that he's going to need to fly? Do the physics actually work for the dragon? I didn't even think they worked. Neil deGrasse Tyson said that they worked. I didn't know. I was just lucky. I got really lucky, because it's all intuitive for me. I don't really have any system of measurement other than knowing that a wingspan needs to be twice as long as a body, for instance. So first thing I'm thinking about is just simply getting into that skeleton, adding these bones. Then on top of that, I'm going to go ahead and load a brush up. Hide this. And I'm going to load a brush up from my... Oh, wait, did we put it in Lightbox? Yeah. You did put it in Lightbox. Okay. AAA. And one of the wonderful things that's also included within your program, guess what's in there, people, if you don't already know, there's an entire human écrochet made by, what's his name? Ryan Kingsland, thank you. I'm terrible with names. Please, no one take insult. My brain. Forgive me. Ryan Kingsland, fantastic work, who gave us all that wonderful gift of that human écrochet, which I have cut apart, pieced apart, used things just to make muscles of. And in this case, it's exactly what I did is, I simply just took, a thigh muscle? And I'll literally, at this point now, fill in that area, bust out a thigh muscle, and it might not be the right shape for the muscle I'm going for. So let's just say I'm going to build the muscles of the back, right? So they go from thick to thin, they wrap in and out, right? How do I achieve that? Well, two ways. Again, I'm going to go use my move brush, kind of move things to where they need to be getting those attachment points right. So in case, here I know that the scapula is going to attach right here under the arm for something that flies like that. Set that in. Oh, and I was telling you again about the secret function, right? So now I'm going to go ahead, grab that snake hook brush, and here's the secret function. So if you hold down Alt while using the snake hook brush, you could take form, turn off RGB, and whoops. Got to do this kind of carefully, because it wants to switch subtools when you do this, but you got to fight it a little bit. And now you should be able to, pull your objects around those bones. So first thing I'm doing right now is I'll just start laying out what would be deep tissue muscles. Getting those in there. I'm going to go back again, and now I'm going to just keep doing this process. So as you now see, now I'm thinking about what's attaching over that. A deltoid muscle, right? How do you make a deltoid muscle? Again, switching back to Move tool. And I'm pulling that deltoid muscle. And as you can imagine, this process, when done completely, takes me a little bit of time. Now, for the sake of this demonstration, I'm kind of slowing it down a bit because I don't have all my hotkeys on here, which is stupid. So I'm using that. And that's good, because if I had my hotkeys on, then you wouldn't know what the heck I was doing. And it would just seem a little fast. So again, I'm just going to pull form. I'm pulling form. So now eventually, I'm going to go out of this mode and really just start to fill these things in. So for big muscles, just go ahead and grab yourself an IMM primitive, grab yourself some spheres, drag those on, and now let's just start using that snake hook brush. Snake hook is H, okay. And again, I could now start pulling form. It used to work a little better in the old version. Weird. Start pulling like what would be pectoral muscles for that creature. So you could start to see that just by having the bones and then by putting the muscles on top and making sure that the muscles themselves are shaped correctly, that they're the thinness that you want them to be and the thickness and so on, that's basically how I start the pieces. And that's how we get an anatomical version of these guys. They're made of these parts. So eventually, after I've gotten done perhaps putting a few of these parts together to make something that doesn't really look that great, but it's got some muscle, that needs a lot of refinement. It's at that point, I just go in and say, let's go ahead, let's dynamesh this stuff, and I'll make it pretty high. 328,000, fine, whatever. And I'll just go ahead and smooth it out. Now, this is not looking that good at all. So what I want to do is I'm going to go ahead. I'm going to just import one little alpha for you. So here I have like this little striated muscle alpha. And primarily the other tool I'm going to use now more than anything else when I'm sculpting is clay buildup. And I'm going to use some kind of Reiki alpha. This one has muscle striations. This is not exactly the alpha I was looking for. And let's just take a look here. Ah, here it is. Thank goodness, I was worried I didn't bring it. Okay, so this is my little trick alpha. This is basically, ZBrush has a great function in it called roll stroke. And what roll stroke allows me to do is to take a little piece of muscle and make it a long piece of muscle, a short skinny piece of muscle, a fat piece of muscle, all depending on my roll stroke. So the way I'm going to customize my brushes now to make muscles, to really make, like actually start sculpting on top of this instead of just making a base mesh, I'm going to go ahead now, set my brush palette to the side so you guys can see what I'm doing here. Turn on my modifier palette. Keep my trails off for this. There's two ways you can sculpt with this. You can sculpt with it raw, or you can sculpt with a roll brush. So for this, I'm going to go ahead, grab my stroke as well. And I'm going to say, this is also important, make sure fast samples is on. Don't ask me why. It just works better. I don't know. And, and now I'm going to go with no trails, but I do want, under my modifiers, turn on roll, right? So now, when I go ahead and roll out this little muscle brush, it makes that, which just looks horrible. Nobody likes that. That looks terrible. So I'm going to take my roll distance, I'm going to turn that all the way up, just go all the way up, on a little alpha like this, and now watch what happens. Now, I can go back and forth and start actually sculpting my muscle systems right through the bones. Now you can see here I made certain mistakes. Like, this is why I keep the bones. So now I could see here's the collarbone, right? So I know that those pectorals are only going to come up to that collarbone. Right? Now later on, I'll add in the other muscles. I'll put in all the neck muscles and stuff like that. But for now, I really want to do this very, like, almost like a forensic scientist. I want to forensically build these things. And this is a process I'm doing with every creature, even if it's totally, like, fictitious and made up, because I really want it. I want the animators to have the confidence to know that this thing is going to move the way it looks like it should move. I want, it's very easy just to take a person and make that work. We all know how people work, There's no trick to it. But when you start going outside of forms that work, it could fall apart very easily. And you really do have to pay attention to the physics. Going back to another one of my little favorite brushes is Flatten. So I use Flatten a lot instead of Smooth, just to kind of like work stuff down. Like so. And after a while, you start to see, in a pretty quick while here, you start to see at least the basis of our anatomy building up. And so from here, I could just keep, remember now I'm in Dynamesh mode, which is awesome. I'm not worried about topology at all. I don't even want to think about it at this point. I don't want to think about it until the very end. Until the very end. Until I have to pose or move something. At that point, I want to think about topology, but not until then. And the reason is because the body is full of undercuts. It's full of deep creases and folds and funky places where if you don't have that kind of stuff on your base mesh, it won't show up in your animation. The animators won't know what to do with it. So you got to have that in there. They got to see it. And you're not going to know beforehand where all those nice creasy wrinkles and folds are in a face or a hand until you've done the high-res stuff. So for everybody here that's young and that really wants to get in the industry, that wants to be a modeler, and they see all these people post pictures of these beautiful wireframes and these gorgeous maps that they've made and laid out all this stuff, I don't really care. It's all crap. I don't really care because it doesn't mean anything. It means nothing. What means something is your eye tuned? Do you see what I'm seeing? Do you see the muscles? Do you see what's wrong with something? We work with a lot of people who work from scans, for instance, at our job. We get scans of actors. It should be something very easy just to get up there and project a face onto a scan or something like that. But you'd be surprised the subtleties required to get that to look photoreal, even the scan. And that's, I think, what a lot of people in the industry now are looking for. Myself, and I know when I'm looking for people to work with, anatomy, number one. Physiology, number one, especially for characters, If you want to make up monsters, I make monsters for a living. I get to have fun and create these creatures and make these dragons and make things for television shows. I only get to do that because I've spent my entire life as a young person literally being in the Museum of Natural History in New York City almost every weekend with my dad, who was a molecular biologist. And I would sit there with him and look at these bones and think about what the heck am I looking at? And even back then, I remember as a kid, they looked wrong to me. Because back in the 80s, dinosaurs stood upright like this, with their tails dragging on the ground. And I talked to my dad. I even remember saying, Dad, those don't look right. Don't you think they should be like this, like birds? And he's like, yeah, you're kind of right. I said, yeah. It's study. It's constant study. And it's also knowing what looks cool. I mean, I can't teach people taste. Nobody can. I guess I have good taste for creatures, I suppose, because people like them, usually. But I don't really have good taste. I just know what works. And I look at nature, and I see things that work and that also somehow look cool. So again, I want to talk about the detail as well and how I get to that, not just building up muscles, because that's really... Move Elastic's also a really nice brush, too, if you just want to start pulling out stuff. So again, it's a very simple process. It's taking little pieces, little chunks of things, and using, basically, again, I'm using this like lumps of clay. When I used to be a sculptor, I would get up with my hands and roll out little snakes and then put those little snakes on top of my armature, right? My armature would always look like a skeleton because I'd have to measure it out. So I'm basically just rolling out little snakes and putting them on top of my bone armature to start making the pieces. Now, some would say, well, but then how do you get all that crazy-ass detail? I'm from New York. Cursing is just what we do. I'm sorry. Forgive me. I got to learn to stop that. But if the president can go do it, why not me? Any case, I'm an artist. At least I have an excuse. Any case, so we want to get on to detail now. How do I get all those scales on there? Would you like to know the secret? There's a magic button in ZBrush that does it for you. And when you wake up and you realize, no, there's no magic button. Jesus God, no, there's nothing. There's no magic behind it. You know what there is? Work, a lot of it. Me sitting there in front of a computer, making scale alphas, and then putting the little scale alphas on individually, sometimes going in and actually doing parts of it by hand. But alphas definitely help. And my technique for doing alphas is a little interesting. So let me show you how that works. You might find it fun. So, let's talk about how I make alphas. Does everybody here know how to make alphas? Or at least you think you do, right? Well, everything's changed a little bit now. Now, in all fairness, guys, ZBrush 4R8 has this new insert the vector displacement thing, and I want to use it, Paul. I want to use it. I can't yet, because I can't get it to run through Max. But I want to use it so bad, and if somebody could help us out, it would be awesome. So I really want to use it, because now, if I had to do the dragons now with 4R8, so all the work I'd done for the dragons was in 4R7. I'd finished my work on them a year ago. 4R8's now come out, and now I can actually have undercuts and scales and awesomeness like that. Oh my God, if I could get that to work through Max, it'd be so awesome. But I can't, not yet. Somebody's going to hook me up and tell me how to work it. I don't know. Back to making alphas. Simple. How do I... So old school way I would do this stuff before this new fanciness with the vector displacements, which I can't get to work yet. I would actually go ahead and make things like, let's import an alpha. All right, so here's my secrets. Here we go. You ready? So, in order to make this alpha, basically is, if you could see it on your screen, let's go ahead and I'm going to subdivide up my, first I want to make this polymesh 3D, and I'm going to subdivide the heck out of this to 4 million, not to 16, to 4 million, because that's enough for the dragons, for me, as far as I'm concerned. Again, I can only work on a little piece of these at a time. Scales are tricky things. So for something like scales, I've got this great alpha. Now this alpha represents probably a day's worth of work just to do this. I mean a full day, just to get this one alpha that comes out nice and clean and looks like scales. This was what the scales looked like for season 3 on parts of the body. So the way I make alphas is we simply take an image, a black and white image. Let's go ahead and go back one more. Import one more, sorry. Oh, yeah. The face of an iguana. Take a photograph of the face of an iguana. You can go on Surface Mimic as well. They've got crocodiles, which, yes, I used the crocodile to make the dragon. Here's my secret. Yes, I did. But I totally changed the alpha because it wasn't right. Dragons have spiky scales, and they're bigger than crocodiles. So I had to take the Surface Mimic, some of the Surface Mimic things, and then tweak them and make them do what I wanted them to do for the dragons themselves. But, any case, sorry, forget that. So now I'm going to go ahead, take this alpha, and instead of just dragging and dropping it on there, I like to paint I actually paint on the dragon's skin. So once I've made all that anatomy, what I like to do then is use Lightbox. So I'll take this alpha, and I'll say make it into a texture. And then I'll take that texture, right, and I'll say add the spotlight. So now I've got this awesome texture with scales, and this all has depth information, right? So that when I'm getting to something like, let's say I'm going to go back a step now. Let's go to my body here. And let's say I wanted to put sort of that scale pattern that we've seen on the dragons onto this chest piece that I've made. So real simple. And this is a long sort of painstaking process of how I lay it out, but I'll kind of do you the little short version. And so basically I'm just going to take this image. I'm going to line it up. Now, as you can see, it's a little clear right here because it's perfect black and white. And I'm just going to increase the intensity a little bit so that it's not see-through anymore. And I'm also looking, you see the little point, so I know that the scales are facing a certain direction, which is going the opposite direction of where I have my model now. So I'm going to turn this guy around. Now I'm going to take this alpha, and I'll get back more into how I made the little scales. But as you can see, you make one scale, you plop it in, you make another scale, you make another scale, you make another scale, literally. That's how I did it, because they're like perfect puzzle pieces. They have to fit together perfectly, or it just looks fake. And what I also like to do now is I'm going to go ahead and turn my opacity down on this thing so that I could see through it. And now I could see the scale pattern on the side of my dragon, right? So now, it doesn't really fit, though, the alpha I made. But what's great is now I can go ahead and use Lightbox's nudge feature. And I'm going to turn off the alpha here, so I'm not using an alpha to nudge anything. And I'm going to make my brush size pretty big. And I'm going to take this image now and see, I could start taking these scales that I've made, or planes of scales, or any image, and start actually moving them around the body to make that chest pattern scale you see on our on Drogon or Viserion, all of them. But there's no sculpt there, Dan. Well, there's about to be. Just give me a sec. So now what am I going to do? Well, real easy. I'm going to go ahead, grab my standard brush, RGB, Z-add off, and I'm going to go ahead now and literally paint my alpha right onto my model. Zippity-doo. And you say, oh, there we go. We got some, oh, that's looking pretty scaly. Now, keep in mind, I'm doing this fast and kind of dirty. These would be things I would be doing on parts of the dragon at super high subdivs. So I can't do this to the whole dragon at once. I can't sculpt this way to the whole thing at once. I need to have the whole anatomy done, have the thing smooth, have the skin folds where they need to be before I even attempt this process. Because this process requires a lot of detail and a lot of UVs and so on and so forth. So again, this is something I'd wait on a bit till the end, but for now, I'm just going to show you, kind of give you a little heads up. Real easy. What am I going to do now? Guess what I'm going to do? I'm going to go masking, mask by color, mask by intensity, and I'm going to turn off the mask so I don't see it. I'm going to turn off the color so you guys can see what it is I'm doing. So I've spent days, perhaps sometimes multiple days, sometimes a week even, making some of these scale patterns that I'm going to lay on. And after I've done that, I could just simply go ahead now. I could use standard brush. I like to use displace for some reason. Oh, seems to be the least destructive way to do this. And I'm going to go ahead and turn on surface mode so that when I pull these out, they'll all kind of stay at the same level. As I'm pulling it won't keep going out in crazy different directions. I also want to turn my Z intensity down. I don't want to have this thing explode at my face. And I want to turn off RGB because I don't want to paint over this map. So now at this point, and that's kind of the thing. So I make these scales just like this. Now these are the ones that are actually on the body. Other scales, so this helps me get a pattern. But this is only part of the problem. I just put these on there and I've used the alphas, but it's still flat. It doesn't have all the niceties that the dragons actually have. So when we start getting into heavier details, now is where I want to be able to take that alpha and not just drag out what I've done, but I really want to increase its believability by plating the skin under it, by thinking about what's happening underneath those scales as well. So I'm going to go ahead and grab this alpha, which is just a gradient. I'm going to take that alpha, I'm going to give it a little bit of a radial fade. Check this out. Where is it? You have alpha, radial fade. Sorry. Like I said, I have ADD, and I don't see things so good. In any case, so Z-add is on. I've got this thing going, and I'm going to crank the intensity just a bit so you can see it. Oh, I want to turn my focal shift like way up. And so what I'm going to do now is start to really like pull out those scales so that I'm going to kind of like undercut them. And I'm like, as I'm doing this too, I'm trying to be as careful as I can. And actually, you know what? Let's turn off, for this, let's turn off surface. Oh, and I almost forgot the most important thing. Before I did any of this, I should have saved a morph target. Now, morph targets, again, for those of you that are ZBrush users, which most of you guys here are, right? So I'm not hoping I'm boring anybody with all this techie talk. But morph targets are really integral to everything you do. So I have it hotkeyed on my system at home, F1, F2. I'm constantly going, save morph target, delete morph target, save morph target, delete morph target. And the reason is because I make mistakes, as we all do. And it's nice to go back and correct our mistakes. But it's also nice to have points to which that we can go back, and morph targets are great for that. So we're going to go ahead and morph target, and I'm going to store a morph target at this point so that I can be a little sloppy, really bring out those scales, you know, like I'm really going to tweak them out. Maybe I'm not being so careful and perfect with them. Now keep in mind too, the mask is still on as I'm doing this. So now it looks kind of like funky, right? But the nice thing is I've got the morph brush. I'll just go ahead now and turn the intensity of that, turn RGB off. I'm going to turn the intensity down pretty low on it. I'm going to be a little bit careful. And I'm going to go back and see what I'm doing? Kind of working back down those pieces. So see that? So I'm just going to do that. Now I'm getting, see that, how there's like, instead of what was flat, now it has dimension coming out, right? And that's really important to getting things to look believable, is that they really need to have dimension. So many times I see artists, you know, I don't want to call people lazy, but taking a base mesh and putting an alpha on it and hitting displace once, you know, it's fine. I mean, it's good. It works. Not really enough, though. You really got to work the stuff. And I really like to work it. And I really like, this is, for me, this is my zen. This is where I'm happiest in the world. I love my kid. I love my wife. I love my life. Everything's wonderful. But there is no zen or bliss quite like sitting here and making scales on dragons all day. I'm not kidding. I love it. Or if it's not scales on dragons, it's whatever it is. So, yeah, it's good life. I'm not complaining. I love it. It's wonderful. It's my zen. And I could literally sit here zenning out like this right in front of a whole crowd of people and not even care because I enjoy it that much. So, yeah, I'll see you guys later. I'm just going to work on my new dragon for next season. Hope you don't mind. And I'll see you. No, I'm just kidding. All right. Seriously, though, so that gives you kind of an idea. Now, this looks kind of raw and blurry. Of course, if I subdivide it up, it's going to look a lot nicer. Kind of. Oh, because the mask was on when I subdivided it. Whoops. Don't do that. Don't subdivide with the mask on. So I can control D it now, just to smooth it out. And again, you know, this is how I'm kind of like basing out my details. Because this is only like detail level 1. when we look at Drogon's head, let's just go back to there again so you can kind of see where this all goes and how crazy it gets. Let's just zoom in there. Yeah. So I'm doing that to the whole body, all over the place with all this nuttiness. And even from here, the guys at Pixamondo usually will help me out with additional levels of cleanup because these guys are huge. I mean, they're, I'll show you. I'm sure you guys are wondering how big they are. I don't know. Have people seen this image? I don't know. Let's find out. 10 minutes. Oh, nobody has any questions, I guess. Okay.
Oh, we got some arms popping up here. Let's get some questions. All right, who was it?
I really rambled on. Nobody took me.
Hey, so you took the time to make this meticulous alpha. How would you match like that same alpha precisely to integrate it into that first part of it? You know what I mean?
Oh, that's a good question. Wait, well, is it a good question? So you're saying how would I integrate that, like let's say the next bunch of alphas that I'd have? So to keep going down the body, how would I do that? The easiest way to say it is, let's do it again. I'll take that morph off. I'll try and realign this thing again. And there's really no perfect way to line them up again once you've done this process. Once I can try to paint them on again like this, but it won't be perfect. There will always be seam lines. There'll be areas that don't look so good. And those are areas that I will have to go in and fix physically, by hand. So I'm going to go ahead now, just to show you again. Standard. So to actually line them up again, what I want to do is I'm going to turn the color back on so that I could see my old pattern of where the scales are. And so let's say I want to just make more scales. I'm going to kind of look at the direction they're pointing. I'm going to line up my image with what I have and try to get it to fit into the old image. It's a little hard to see, but essentially, right? So I'm going to do that. And now, I'm also going to turn on spotlight radius just so I don't have to see the whole thing at once. So I can go ahead now and let's say, well, the scales are bigger than that. Let's try to line up certain parts of it and just paint those in as well. Now, as you can see, you're going to get like little, you see like there's little half scales or pieces of scales that don't quite fit wherever I put those two pieces together. It's not so bad. I could still make it work, more or less. Probably will pull pretty good, but that's kind of the process. So once I've gone ahead and painted in a large area just like this, again, I'm using displacement maps to do this. These alphas, you can call them alphas, you can call them displacements. That's essentially what I'm doing. And again, these alphas are only part of the job because then on top of these alphas, then it needs the additional work. It needs the noise. It needs all the scratches, the creases, the wrinkles. And those just come in with using other little alphas, like little rock alphas that come with the program or spray strokes. And if I had all, for my workshop, I'll certainly go into detail more about exactly the strokes I'm using and the pens and things I'm using. But, there's a lot of techniques I use, like a ton. And it really is all just a matter of, I don't really think or plan on it before I do it, other than just painting it on. It just kind of happens, and I just take little pieces from here and there and stick them on and say, hey, that's working.
All right, we'll get the question back here and then the question in the front here. So there's a question back here.
Shoot. Who has a question?
The question is, since you take the time to make the skeleton and muscle structure and all these things, I was wondering, first, how long it took you to make the dragon, and second, how do you manage, like, say, due date or whatever, whenever you have to turn in the dragon and doing all these details and all this work?
Well, it varied from season to season. In season 3, the requirements were pretty simple. So I think maybe me and an assistant did Season 3 Dragon in about 2 months. Took us to do it. No, not even, 4 weeks for that one. That was pretty simple. Season 4, by the arena scene, that was about 2.5 months worth of work for that. Season 5, 3 months, and from there on, it was about 3 months I would spend on the dragons in total every year for the show. As far as handing them in deadlines and stuff like that is concerned, luckily, working with HBO is fantastic. They are a very rare client in which they give me a lot of freedom to do what I do. And that freedom went into the deadlines and into the budgets. It was not, it's a bigger deal than most television shows. And they knew that, and they gave me that freedom. So, whereas on shows like The Flash, maybe I have 5 weeks to finish a character. Having, 3 months for me to sculpt something and work on the designs was awesome. And for TV, that's like, you never get that. So, yeah. And next question.
Right here.
Well, thank you for coming out.
Thank you for having me.
My question is kind of back to the alphas.
Ah.
So you spent a lot of time to create these alphas and to paint them onto the mesh. Do you end up keeping the color of the alphas on there and using them in texturing?
No, because I don't texture them. And the reason I don't texture them is because these things, how do I say this? There's about like 50, 60 UDIMs per dragon. The actual polygon count of them by the time I'm done, and when I actually submit them, I don't even submit the full both sides of the dragon. I submit only half the dragon. I submit a full sort of low-res version. I submit a full, the full body with all the muscles and the bones and stuff. But for the final, what I send in, it's too big. That's not me, is it? No. It's too big. It's 250 million polygons for half the dragon. So, that's a lot. I have to split it into parts, and that's just one of them. So, yeah, it gets really tight. And as far as the color work, as you were asking, I don't really get to handle the color work because that requires people that use Mari and that can deal with multiple UDIMs. I'm a single artist. When I was doing that show, I was working from my own little computer at home. I did not have the bandwidth to sculpt and paint these things. Just to sculpt them alone, I still need additional help. The guys in Germany do a lot of work on top of what I do. They'll do the morph blends. They'll do additional cleanup work on these pieces because they are so massive. And especially this last season, I even had to tell HBO, I'm like, yeah, you guys are giving me 3 months to do this work, but don't expect a finished dragon out of me in 3 months. I'll give you guys, that head is basically to the level I took things to. Which is still fine, but yeah, they're massive. There's little pieces here and there I can't hit and I need help with, and they help out, and they do great work. And they do, fantastic animation work as well. So happy with everything that they've done for the show. It's just fantastic. So yeah.
We have time for one more question if it's out there. Oh, right here. Here you go.
Glad you talked about that. I was going to ask, when they are doing the animation for it, do you get to consult on that since, you're trying to get such accurate
Yes,
anatomy?
yes, of course.
And I was going to ask if you're happy with how it turned out. Really, you are. And it does look good.
I will show you by example what I mean. Just real quick. So if I open this up, hold on a second. So a lot of times, like early on, so here's a very rough early concept of Drogon from season 5, where I basically I've taken the old model, I've pretty much erased all the detail from it, and put a little Danny model on top and posed it showing, basically here's how he works. So a lot of what I have to do does affect with animation in such that will you be able to fit these 5 guys on his back, and how is it going to work? Oh, this is sort of funny. I had this idea, and they actually used it in Lord of the Rings. No, The Hobbit. where I wanted Drogon originally, the fire was supposed to come inside of him like a big glowing thing, I thought. And then we didn't go with that. And I'm glad we didn't go with that because that didn't really work so good. But in terms of the posing, yeah, you could see right here, like, I have to set these poses for them. I have to be able to show them that the dragons look cool flying, they look cool on the ground, they work on the ground, and I do that by using Z-sphere rigs. I take the dragons, I make little Z-sphere rigs, pose them around, just to show them, yeah, he works on the ground. Yeah, he can run. Yeah, he can climb up a wall, you know. And that responsibility falls on me before it ever goes to animation. I also do get, excuse me. I do get kickbacks from Pixamondo in terms of certain things they need for rigging that did affect the design in terms of like the length of the arm to wing ratio. I did have to make some design changes to accommodate IK systems. But in general, they make anything work. So, all right. So, is there another question? Is that?
Well, here's the last question.
Okay.
We'll take it from online. What is your method to attack for Retopo?
I send it to my assistants. I'm kidding. I do not. I do it myself. I don't have assistants. No, I use Maya. I use Maya's, what is that called again? Quadra, thank you. Maya Quadra. Old school. I know there's all these new fancy programs. Honestly, all right. When I'm really lazy, guess what I use? Yeah, baby! It works! I love it! No, I'm serious, I do. And guess what else I use to outlay my UVs? Come on, somebody guess how I make my UVs? Correct. But all these things require offset UVs, which ZBrush still, it can handle, because you can do multi-map exporter and have all your offsets export, but you can't really make can you? No, you can't make, not as far as I know, additional UDIMs inside of ZBrush. So for that, I simply bring my already, cut up apart mesh that I've made in ZBrush, bring that to Maya, create my offsets in Maya. It takes about 10 minutes, and I'm done. That's it. Simple stuff. So wherever I don't need to topologize, I won't. Animation, when we're dealing with production and animation, that's when topology has to be specific. But for those of us, for instance, that are artists, like I said, topology, this is not something you should be thinking about, unless you're really into rigging. It's important. And it is definitely important to know how the topology works when things animate. And these are the kind of things you just sort of learn when you're in the studio environment. But, that's all techie. I let ZBrush do as much as it can. And so far I've been able to get away with a lot. A lot of really unprofessional stuff.
All right, on that note, Dan Katcher, everybody.